What is going on, guys? It's Modded Warfare here. Welcome back to another video on building the ultimate RGH 3.0. In the first video, we covered the full setup process of how to RGH the Xbox 360 using, a Jasper or Falcon Xbox 360 with the new RGH 3.0 hack, which did not require a glitch chip to RGH and gives us near instant boot times as well, which is really awesome. So if you haven't watched that part yet, definitely check it out. It's a full tutorial on how to RGH the Xbox 360. So in this part though, we're going to be customizing the console. We're going to be adding things like RGB LED strips, LED fans, also things like a clear window on the side panel so you can see into the internals with it all lit up with the LEDs, and a clear fan duct, an open drive lid so you can see the disc spinning through the window, as well as doing a ring of light mod to the RF board as well so you can get different colored LEDs for the power LEDs. All of that kind of stuff. We're going to do all of that here in this video. We'll probably upgrade the hard drive as well, and also install a bunch of Homebrew applications as well, and just try and make the most ultimate RGH that we can out of this console. That is the plan, that is the objective, so let's go ahead and dive right into this, shall we? First thing we're going to do is install some LED strips. So obviously we need to put the console back into the cage first, because the LED strips are going to go along the side of the cage that it sits in, the chassis. So we're going to go ahead and pop the motherboard back inside. And once we do this, we're obviously going to put in the screws. Now, I'm not going to put in all of the screws. I'm going to put in most of the screws. But if any of the screws, are not going to go in all the way, I'm just going to leave it, because obviously the motherboard isn't really going to sit perfectly flat because of the wires underneath. So anything that looks like the screws are not wanting to go in, I'm just going to leave, because we don't want to force the screws too tight and crush the wires or pinch any of the wires that are being used for our RGH. So that's what we're going to do right here. Okay, so once we have the motherboard back in the chassis, we need to install our LED fans. They just go in place of the original fans. Now, there is a different plug on the fans to the fan header that's on the motherboard, and that's because these LED fans were designed for the older motherboards, the Xenons and Zyphers, but it does come with an adapter that I still have to the newer fan header, so we can go ahead and connect that adapter up and then plug it into the fan header on the motherboard and get that powered. So we can just pop them back in. So once we've got that in place and we've got our RF board plugged in and we're all good. So the next thing I recommend doing once you've got the fans plugged in is also plug in the RF board in the front of the console as well, and just power up the console again and just check to make sure that the RGH is still working. Because when you put it in this metal cage, obviously, it may have been working fine on the motherboard as a test bench, on a box or something when you were starting it. But once you put it into this metal cage, if there's any stray bits of solder or something that could be bridging something or shorting something out, or of course just putting the screws in, you may have crushed the wires for the RGH, because otherwise, if we install the LED strips and the console doesn't work, it's more awkward to take the console back out again to fix anything once we have the LEDs in place. So we're going to go ahead and just test it right here. And as you can see, it is still booting up just fine. And we have our LED fans, as you can see, starting up there, which look pretty cool. And again, that was an instant boot time, which is nice. It's lovely to have instant boot on an RGH. So we're going to go ahead and turn it back off now and install our LED strips to the sides. So we'll put them on these sides here. So one strip along here, one strip along here. What I've got here is I've got a Wi-Fi controllable LED control box here, so that we can use Wi-Fi to control the LEDs, which is going to be better than IR. It does support infrared as well with a remote control, but when you put the case back on, it can be hard to get through the case with the IR receiver. So we don't need the IR receiver that's on here. And this is quite a large LED control box, so it's probably not going to fit into the console as is. So what my plan is to take it apart and take out the actual LED control board from it. And as you can see, it's a much smaller chip, a much smaller board. So we don't really have to, worry about getting that to fit in somewhere. It'll easily fit in the console now. And obviously we're going to desolder the two cables that are connected to it for the IR receiver and for the power. We're going to get rid of that cable, and we're also going to get rid of the LED cable as well, so that we just have the board. And as you can see, it also has VCC and ground pads here on the control box, so we can just wire up a 12 volt and ground connection from the Xbox motherboard to power it. So what I've decided to do here is behind the USB ports, there is a pad right behind it that does not have a chip on it. And the large square on that pad is a 12 volt pad. So you get 12 volt from that pad. And right next to it, there's a ground pad as well, a smaller one that is ground right to the left. So that is what we're going to use to power the LED control box. So what we need to do first of all is prepare that pad by essentially adding a little bit of flux. First of all, I cleaned it with some alcohol to make sure, because there's some dust on there. So we get rid of that with some rubbing alcohol and then add some flux to the pads. And then of course we add some solder. Now the solder wasn't taking initially, so I changed the tip out from that precision tip to a better tip for being able to apply enough heat to that pad, because it does take quite a bit of heat to get the solder to actually stick on there to stay on that pad. So we'll go ahead and do that to the 12 volt pad there and to the ground pad. And once we've got that prepped, we can then get the LED control board prepped as well by taking two small wires and soldering them to the VCC and ground pad on the LED control box. With that prepared, the next step, of course, is to go ahead and stick that to the back of the USB ports by using a command strip. So just peel back the command strip there, and I've stuck that on to the back of those USB ports. And as you can see, the wires line up pretty well with the pad that they need to be soldered to. So we just solder the 12 volt wire to the 12 volt pad, and then of course the ground wire to the ground pad on the motherboard. And now we'll be able to power the LED control board from the Xbox motherboard. So when we turn the console on, the control board will turn on, and when we turn it off, it will turn off as well. So that is all prepared. So with that LED strip, I've cut 4 small wires to solder on to the pads on the LED strip for 12 volt and red, green and blue. And then at that point, we can then stick that LED strip, peel back the adhesive strip on the back, and then stick that LED strip onto the side of the console, onto the chassis. And as you can see, it lines up right next to the LED control board. So we can just take the other ends of those wires from the LED strip and solder them onto the corresponding pads on the LED control board. And now we have that LED strip all wired up and ready. So for the next LED strip, of course, I'm just going to cut it to size. And once we've got that prepared, we're going to stick that on the opposite end of the chassis to light up the other end of the case. So we're going to go ahead and stick that on right there. And what I've done is I've got 4 long wires. So all we need to do is solder these black wires from the LED strip that's connected to the control box and wire it up from that LED strip to the other LED strip on the other side. That way the control box is able to control both LED strips simultaneously. So we're going to go ahead and hook that up as well. And just solder again each end of those black wires to the corresponding pads on the 2 LED strips. And the way I'm wiring this up, as you can see, is I'm trying to hide the wires as much as possible by having them just kind of below the fans and running along below the fans and then up to the LED strip. And yeah, just trying to hide them as much as possible, essentially, so they don't stand out too much. Okay, here we go. Moment of truth. We've got the LEDs connected on the right and left-hand side. They're connected to each other. And of course, the strip is connected to this LED control box, which is behind the USB ports, which is connected to a 12 volt and ground pad on the motherboard. So we're going to go ahead and turn this on. And there we go. We've got our red LEDs. And there it is. It's detected on the app. And there we go. We can go ahead and change the colors. Give it green, blue. And of course, there's different things, timers, brightness levels that we can adjust. We can change it to white, to different color temperature, all that kind of stuff, different scenes. Let's put it back to something like white or something like that. But yeah, there you go. As you can see, that is working perfectly fine right there. We've got our LEDs and we can customize them. We can control them with the app on our phone, which is pretty awesome. And because it's Wi-Fi, it's not, like the IR receiver where it could be blocked by the case. So even with the case back on, we should have no problem getting the signal to change the LEDs. So that's all working. So the next step, if we go ahead and turn this off. Okay, so I think the next step is going to be to change the LEDs in the front. So of course we just get the 4 LEDs for the different controller lights that are all green right now, in the middle power LED, which is green. So we're going to change those out for some different colored LEDs. I think I'm going to go with red and blue. I've done that combination before and I just think it looks really nice. So, but yeah, red and blue combination, I think, for the power LEDs. So that's the next step. We'll go ahead and do that now. Now, what we can do is we need to get some 0603 LEDs for the power. So the power button LED is always an 0603 sized LED, an SMD LED. So you need an 0603 to replace that power LED. So I'm going to use a blue 0603 for the power LED. And then for the other LEDs roundabout, these are a much larger size, but you can either use an 0603 LED for those, or you can use a 0805 LED for those, LEDs that go along the side for the controller LED lights. Those can all be 0805 or 0603 LEDs. So the way that we actually get these LEDs off is obviously apply a little bit of flux to them and then just create a blob of solder on your soldering iron, and then you can just kind of rub that blob up against the LEDs back and forth, and then it should just come away free with the iron. Obviously it will destroy the LED, but I mean, we're not using that LED anymore anyway, so we just get rid of it, no problem. And then we can take our replacement 0603 LED and then just drop that onto the pad. These are very, very small. There is a positive and negative indicator on the LEDs, but they're on the back of the LEDs. And I'll put a little diagram up on screen here to show you the correct orientation for the power LED, so you know which way they're meant to be orientated for positive and negative. So you can also use a multimeter as well, measuring resistance. Then you can just use the multimeter probes for positive and negative on the LED to see which side is positive and which way is negative by seeing if the LED lights up or not. So that's another way that you can kind of test. So from there, we're going to go ahead and just grab it with some tweezers, line it up with the positive and negative pads on the RF board, and then we'll just get the soldering iron in and melt one pad to tack it on there. And once it's tacked on, you can let go with the tweezers and then just come round to the other pad and melt the solder on the other pad, which should just, attach it to the other end. And then that's it. You've got the LED tacked in place, no problem. So that's the power LED. Okay, so it's the same thing with the larger LEDs as well. You just add a big blob of solder on the iron and then just rub it up against the back of the LED and try and melt all three pads simultaneously so that the LED will just lift off. So for these larger LEDs around the outside, these are more obvious because if you put the 12 volt on this pad right here and then the ground on this pad, you can see that it lights up green. But then if you put the ground on the other pad, it lights up red, which is only if you get like an error on the console, then it lights up red normally. So you've got green and red. So we just want to solder the positive end of the LED to the larger pad here, and the smaller pad obviously is the negative end of the LED. So it's the same thing. We just grab the LED using some tweezers. I am using an 0805 LED for this, but again, you can use an 0603 as well. So this LED is a bit larger than the one I'm using for the power LED, but I'm just going to grab it with the tweezers and do the same thing again. Just hold it over the pads and just, solder one pad to tack it in place. And then you can let go and then solder the other pad. And then that gets the LED attached. Quickly show you the same thing on the other pad. So we'll do the same thing. This time I'm going to use a red LED. So we'll pop that on. Again, we'll just use the iron, create a blob on the iron, and then just rub that up against the LED until it comes free. And then once it comes free, we can then take our 0805 LED, make sure we get it round the correct orientation, and then grab it with the tweezers, line it up with the pads, solder one pad first of all to tack it in place, and then come round to the other pad and just melt the solder on the other pad to tack the other side in place. And then there you go, you've got the LED installed. And we're just going to do that with every single one of the LEDs. Again, I'm going red, blue with the LEDs because I think the kind of red-blue combination looks really nice once it's all done. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And as you can see, once we've got it all done, we're going to clean up the flux with some rubbing alcohol. And then once that's all clean, we can then take that RF board out and test it by plugging it back into the console and firing up the console. And as you can see, it is now up and running with the LEDs. You can see all the LEDs lighting up there, red and blue. And yeah, this is going to look really nice once it's all back together. So yeah, that's essentially all the kind of LED stuff that I wanted to do to the console right here. So the next step is the DVD drive. So the DVD drive, we've got this kind of clear disc lid for the DVD drive, so you can see the disc spinning inside the console once we put the window on it. So that's the next thing that we're going to do right here. So all we have to do is take apart this disc drive. Now it's pretty simple. On the back of the disc drive, there are 4 Phillips screws. So you can use a normal Phillips star screwdriver to take that out. And once all 4 of those screws have been removed, we can then kind of pull up on these plastic bits that stick out, these black plastic bits that stick out, to try and pull the lid off. There is a magnet on the top of the lid, and it can be quite stiff to get this out. But once you've got it apart, it should just come apart. The bottom and the top should just come off. So what we need to do is get the magnet out of the lid. So the lid of the disk drive here has this magnet inside, and you can access it by going to the sticker on the top and peeling back that sticker on the top. Once you got that sticker off, you can then take the magnet by holding it from the bottom and then twisting the top anti-clockwise, and it should pop out no problem. And then you can basically twist it back together again once it's out of the lid. And there you go, you got the magnet. You can just stick that back onto the console and you can see it spinning there, no problem. So that's that set up correctly. So once the magnet's out, we can then take this disk drive cover, this clear cover, and put it over the disk drive. So these 2 little clips at the side line up with this piece of plastic that sticks out at the side. So they just go to either side of this little plastic bump that sticks out. So we're going to go ahead and just click those over and put them over to the other side as well. And then the magnet just pops on top. Now what we need to do in addition to this is also hot glue it in place, because when you eject the disk drive, it does exert a little bit of force on this lid. And what can happen is it can slowly move over time and move out of alignment. So what we want to do is just hot glue it in place to make sure that it does not move. And then once we've got that set up, we are all good. Now that we've got all of that set up, all we need to do is put this console back together. So first things first, we pop in our clear fan duct into the console, which just goes directly over the fans, no problem. Then of course, we're going to plug in our DVD drive power cable and our data cable for the DVD drive as well. And the yellow parts of the cables are the parts that plug into the motherboard end. And then the other ends, of course, plug into the DVD drive. What I've had to do is I've also had to brace it with this zip tie. So I've wrapped some zip ties around the disk drive as tight as they will go and put them just a bit under the lid, which is exerting a little bit of force upwards on the lid, because what happens to these clear drive lids over time is they can kind of start to sag, and then they start pushing on the disk and causing the disk to grind and not being able to spin up properly. So that can happen with these things, and it's quite frustrating when it happens. So this just kind of prevents that, because it was starting to sag a little bit on that front part where it was starting to push down on the disk and making a bit of a grinding noise. So with this zip tie just keeps that lifted up a little bit over the disk, so it's not sagging too much on it, and therefore the disk can spin freely, which is what we want. Okay, so doing all of these changes to the internals obviously isn't going to make a difference if we're covering it up with the case. So what I've got here is I've cut out a side window, just using a Dremel essentially to cut out a side window here for the case. And what we're going to do is take a sheet of acrylic. So I've got this sheet of acrylic, and I'm going to go ahead. It's obviously clear acrylic. It's still got the film on it. So I'm just going to peel back one end of the film, the protective film layer on it, and then just put it onto the underside of the window. And then we're just going to use some hot glue to essentially stick it in place. So I'll put some hot glue on the sides here, and then just, press it down onto the hot glue and wait for it to set. And then once that's set up, we can go ahead and peel the other end off the acrylic to get our window. So we now have a nice side panel window here that we can use to see into the internals of the system and see all of our LED strips and LED fans and all that stuff, and the disc spinning in the console. Okay, so now it's just a case of taking that side panel and putting it back on, and then we're going to put the whole console back together. Now I've already put the RF board back on properly. I've got the screws in on the RF board in the front and the little plastic piece that goes on the front. So I already got that clipped on. So from this point, it's as simple as putting the eject button in first of all. That's something that I often forget sometimes when I'm rebuilding the console, and then end up with no eject button once it's all back together. So make sure that eject button is on, and then we're going to flip it over to the back and screw in the rest of the screws. Now the two long screws in the middle, we're not going to put those in because there's no screw holes for those to go in because we have the window on there now, so those middle screws are going to be left out. And for the rest of the screws, I recommend screwing them in very gently. Don't put them in too tight because obviously we've got those RGH wires on the bottom of the motherboard. We don't want to crush those or pinch those. And then of course we just take the other half of the shell and we just connect that up at the front by getting all the clips in place. And then again, we just flip over to the back and do the exact same thing with the back. You can see those Talisman Whisper fans there. So we just clip those in place. And then we've got, of course, the top and bottom sections. So the kind of grill that goes along the top just slots in place, clicks down with the clips. And then again, exactly the same thing with the bottom half as well, the bottom section. And once that bottom grill is now in place, finally we can add the faceplate as well, where we just have to line the faceplate up with the front of the console and clip it into place. And once that's all sorted, it's now time to just add the hard drive. Now this hard drive is a 120 gigabyte hard drive that's in the console right now. And obviously, since this was my main primary hard drive, it has all my content on there. So there's only 9 gigabytes of available space on there. So I think it makes sense for us to upgrade the hard drive. Now, I do have a spare hard drive here. This is a 1 terabyte laptop hard drive, and that's all that's required to replace the hard drive in the 360. You just need a laptop hard drive that is, you know, a 2.5 inch drive, or like an SSD that's a 2.5 inch SATA SSD. So we've got a 1 terabyte hard drive here that we'll replace. So what we need to do is open up the plastic shell of the current hard drive. So these little screws are a T7, I believe, Torx 7 screws. So we can just undo those with a T7 screwdriver, get all of those out. There's one sneaky little hidden screw underneath the sticker with Microsoft written on it, the Microsoft sticker. So that one, you know, you have to puncture the sticker to get the screw out. It's not like the warranty is still valid for these things anymore. So I'm just going to go ahead and take that out. And then we're just going to separate the two plastic pieces. They should just come apart. And then from there are 4 more screws holding this little plastic cage in place. And these are much larger. These are, I think, Torx 9 screws, maybe 8 or 9. I believe it's 9 Torx 9 screwdriver to take those out. So there's 4 of those black screws that we take out with the T9 screwdriver. And then that little metal lid will just lift right off. And that will reveal the underside of the hard drive that's inside. So we can just separate that from the little SATA data and power connector, and then just take that out of the plastic shell. And as you can see, it's the exact same type of hard drive. This is a 120 gigabyte drive, and we're going to replace it with this 1 terabyte drive. Okay, so in order to actually copy the content from the 120 gigabyte drive to the 1 terabyte drive, we can't just clone the drives because, you know, it's a 360 drive's kind of awkward when it comes to drive cloning. So what we're going to do instead is, first of all, take that 1 terabyte drive that's not configured for the Xbox 360, and we need to connect that up to our hard drive casing, our hard drive shell, connect that up to the SATA and data cables there. And then we're just going to plug that back onto the top of the console, plug it back into the console, and then start up the console, because what we need to do is format it on the Xbox 360. Okay, so we're going to head over to Settings, System, and then we're going to go down to Console Settings, and then go down to System Information. And we need to get the console serial number right there. So I'm going to take a note of that serial number. And then we can use that serial number to format the hard drive. So we're going to press Y on device options on the hard drive, go to format and format the device. And then I have to enter the serial number. Okay, and then we can hit done. And that starts formatting the 1 terabyte drive to the Xbox. Okay, there we go. That's better. So now we've got hard drive 926 gigabytes free. So now I need to just copy the contents of the other hard drive onto this one, which I'm going to do on the computer just to make this a bit faster and easier. So we're going to go ahead and switch on over to the computer and hook the 2 hard drives up to the computer. Of course, you can just plug in the hard drives directly into the computer via SATA, or you can use like a SATA to USB adapter and plug them in via the USB ports. So anyway, I've got both drives connected to the computer here, and we're going to download this software called Fat Explorer. So downloaded the 64-bit version here, and I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And in here, we can just drag the software over to our desktop. So this is like a kind of modern version of Export 360, I suppose, a bit more advanced. So I'm going to right click and run it as administrator. And this is not a free software, but it does come with like a 7-day trial. So we should be able to get this done on the trial. So from here, we're going to head on over to devices. And hopefully it'll detect both Xbox drives here. Yep, there we go. Xbox 360, Xbox 360. So we're going to integrate into Windows, which will mount these as a virtual drive in Windows Explorer so we can access them. So we'll just go ahead and mount the content partition, and we'll use, drive Y. And there we go. That opens that one. So this is clearly the one that doesn't have anything on it. And then we'll do the same thing with the other Xbox drive, integrate into Windows, and we'll use a different drive letter. So now we have both drives here mounted on the computer. So I can just take the whole content folder from the 120 gigabyte drive and just copy it to the 1 terabyte drive. Okay, so everything's copied over here. All the profiles, downloadable content, save game data, all that stuff is now copied. So now that I've done that, I can go ahead and unmount those virtual drives. So we should be good. We should just be able to plug in that hard drive now, that 1 terabyte hard drive, and it should still have all the content on it from the 120 gigabyte drive, but we just have more capacity available now. Okay, so now we just need to put the hard drive back together, back in the plastic shell, and plug it back in, and we now have the hard drive upgrade done. So the next step is to set up the software side of the RGH. Okay, so on the computer, I'm going to head on to the realmodscene.com and download the latest version of Dash Launch, which is a very important Homebrew app to have installed on your RGH. So I'm going to download that to my computer, open up the zip file, and then I'm going to copy it to the USB drive that we put XEX menu on. So we're just going to go ahead and create a new folder on that USB drive called Dash Launch version 3.21. And then we're just going to go ahead and extract all of the data from that zip file for Dash Launch into that folder. The next Homebrew app we're going to get is Aurora. So again, on the realmodscene.com, we can head to the Real Mod Scene forums, head to Aurora releases, and then we can go down to the latest hotfix of Aurora, and then go to the website phoenix.xboxunity.net and download the latest release package. From there, same thing again, we're going to open up that zip file and then head on to our USB drive and create a new folder called Aurora on our USB. And then we're going to copy the contents of the Aurora zip file into that folder. And that's just got those two main Homebrew apps copied over to the USB. So another thing I'm going to do is download the latest system update for the 360 from Microsoft servers. So we want to do this because when I actually did the RGH to my console, I was on an older kernel version for the system, but the custom firmware we built for the RGH and what we wrote onto the console, that custom firmware is actually on the latest firmware. It's the latest kernel version, 17559. So therefore, I'm missing some files for the hard drive for this latest system update. So I'm going to download the system update from Microsoft servers here and just copy the system update folder from the zip file into the root of my USB drive. The USB drive, I believe, needs to be in FAT32 format for this system update to work from the USB. And we also need to rename the system update folder. So instead of it being called $system update, it's going to be $YSTEM update. So we replace the first S in system with another $sign instead. It's kind of weird how that works, but that's what I need to do to get the console to actually detect the update. So we put that system update on there. We've got our Homebrew apps on there. So now we can unplug that USB and plug it into our 360. Okay, so when we plug that USB drive into our console, we just wait a few seconds and then we get a pop-up saying a system update is available. And I can select this. Just to be clear though, you don't want to do this if, if you've not got your actual firmware, the custom firmware updated to the latest firmware version, the latest kernel version. Otherwise it will flash your firmware with a stock firmware. But since we've already updated the firmware, our custom firmware is already on 17559, the highest kernel version. This will just extract all the kind of additional things that aren't included in there, just kind of the updates to the hard drive to get the avatar showing up and some other functions working. So it just extracts it, reboots the system. And as you can see, when we boot back up here, our avatar is back and working. So we're all good. So now we can get into getting some Homebrew on here. You can see I've got a bunch of like games and stuff that are already pre-installed because this was my main hard drive. I made a game with zombies in it, which is kind of exciting because this game never actually worked After a while, it just stopped working. There's another error when I was connected to Xbox Live where it still wouldn't allow me to launch it. So we should be able to bypass that now with Homebrew apps and stuff. So I'm kind of excited about that. So we'll go into System and we'll head into Storage and we'll take the XEX menu on the USB drive. We'll just go ahead and grab that and copy it over to the hard drive now. So our 1 terabyte drive, just copy that over. Okay, there we go. So XEX menu is now on there. So next we're going to head over and run XEX menu. So we'll go to My Games and we'll find XEX menu over here and run it. And then what I'm going to do from here is hit RB, right bumper, and then that takes me to the USB drive, or I can hit X and go to the USB drive from here. And then I'm going to go down to dash launch and press Y and copy it, and then press X and head down to the HDD, the hard drive. And I'm going to paste dash launch onto the hard drive. And then I'm going to do the same thing with Aurora as well. I'm going to copy it from the USB and paste it here on the hard drive. So we now have those Homebrew apps, and then I'm going to launch dash launch. In terms of Homebrew apps that you should install when you first get your RGH, is obviously going to be, you know, XEX menu #1, and then like dash launch #2, Aurora #3. Depending on whether you're setting the Xbox up for connecting to Xbox Live or not, then things kind of deviate a little bit. But I'm not kind of setting this console up for Xbox Live just now, so I'm just going to head to the paths, and I'm going to change the default path to launch Aurora. So I'm going to say aurora.xex is our default path, and then for holding down X, I'm going to change that to the XEX menu. So content 000. And then code 9999, which is XEX menu, and we'll select that. So when I hold down X, it can take me to XEX menu. And then for network settings, I'll enable ping patch. I'll make sure live block is enabled so that we can connect up our network without getting banned. And then we've got plugins. We'll just ignore that for now. And yeah, that should probably do. Configurator, I guess we can enable the FTP server. And then we'll press right bumper and we will press X to save settings to the HDD. And then I guess I can press A to load those settings from the HDD and just double check that it did set everything correctly, which it appears to have done. So we should be all good right there. So now we can just press right bumper twice and then quit dash launch, and it should load us into Aurora by default. And as you can see here, Aurora is loading up. Okay, so now that we've got dash launch set up to load us into Aurora, and we have live block enabled to block us from Xbox Live, I can safely plug in the network cable now and connect to the internet, since we're blocking Xbox Live's connection, so there's no risk of getting, you know, console banned or anything. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is go to the dashboard and hold down the right bumper on my controller, and that will take me back to the original dashboard. I can then go into System, Network Settings, Wired Network Connection, and we will do a test of the PC connection, not the Xbox Live connection, because Xbox Live connection is being blocked. So we'll just use the test PC connection to connect to our network. And now that that's set up, I can just basically dashboard again, and that will take me back to Aurora with a network connection this time. So there we go, we've got an IP address. So now I'm going to head into settings. I'm going to go down to profile, and I'm going to connect to Xbox Unity. So, you know, we've got my username right there. I'm going to request an API key. Then it's going to ask me for my Xbox Unity password. Okay, so I type my password, I hit done. It grabs the API key, and then I go ahead and enable the Xbox Unity connection. So now I'm going to go to content and add my content. So all my content is in the content folder on this hard drive. So I'm just going to add the path to my content folder, which is hard drive content. So I'm just going to go ahead and select that. Scan depth on 3 because it's content folder, and then it's the 000 folder, and then the title ID folders, and then in there contain the actual content. So 3 on scan depth, and I'll just, you know, leave the script data, or fine, I'll just put them on applications, I guess, and click save. And now we'll see what happens here, and there we go. All of my games are now showing up. And it's just going to take a little second to download all of the covers from xboxunity.net. But as you can see, the covers are now being downloaded. And yeah, I can even run the games that were not allowing me to launch them before. It can bypass those checks and let me load an old classic from 2009, for example, which is pretty crazy. Haven't played this game in years. So yeah, we've basically got everything set up here. We've got Aurora as our main dashboard. We've got XAX menu installed. We've got Dash Launch installed to bind everything together with all of our settings enabled and all of our content and stuff on the hard drive showing up. So we are all set. We have completed our ultimate RGH now. All right, so as moment of truth time, we've got everything set up and ready. It's all back together now, fully RGH'd with all of the cosmetic modifications we've done to it, all of the LED stuff. So let's go ahead and turn it on, and we'll see the blue power LED right there. And we'll switch on over to the 360 right there. So there you go. You can see there the blue and red. It looks really nice when the blue and red LEDs come up when it powers on. And we've got our blue power LED showing up here. And as you can see on the actual console, that we're getting our Aurora dashboard loading up automatically with all of our content on there. So I've laid it flat here so you can see it a little bit better from the window. But yeah, obviously it's going to look a lot brighter, you know, at night and stuff like that. So I'll show you guys what it looks like once all the lights are turned off and everything. But this also has a flash drive as well. So if we eject the current disk that's in here, and I'll put in Dead Island Riptide. And as you can see, this is clearly not a legitimate disk here, but we'll spin that up. So we've got that spinning up, as you can see. And if I pan that up, you can see there in the top left-hand corner, it is detected as Dead Island Riptide, not a DVD or an unrecognized disk. So we do also have the DVD drive flashed as well in the console, which is pretty sweet. So we'll go ahead and turn these LEDs back onto white, which is my preferred look for the console right there. So as you can see here, guys, we've got everything done up now. That's the whole thing completed. We've got a 1 terabyte hard drive. We've got our Ring of Light mod. We've got our LED strips that are remote control, as well as, you know, the LED fans, our window on the side, our clear DVD drive case as well. So you can see the disc spinning up inside. All of that stuff is now complete. So hope you guys enjoyed this whole little project, this 2-part series. This was all for reaching 300,000 subscribers. I wanted to kind of do the whole RGH 3.0 hack on my original Xbox 360, the first console I got, which is the whole, you know, console that started the channel. Basically, I started the channel doing modding videos on this console. So it made sense, I guess, to just kind of do this console up as much as possible and try and do justice to that whole thing. So yeah, I think it worked out pretty well. So yeah, anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And yeah, I know what I'm going to do with this console now, so I'll see you guys in the next one.